Good evening, everyone. If you just got here and you'd like to speak tonight after the presentation, please fill out a speaker slip and bring it up to us. And with that, we will get started. We are here tonight to present to you the Draft Program Environmental Impact Report on the Cannabis Land Use Ordinance and Licensing Program. I see many familiar faces in the crowd, and so you'll know my name is Jessica Metzger, and I am the project manager for this project. And with me tonight, I also have Dan Clement behind me here, who's our Deputy Director of Long Range Planning, and Mindy Fogg, who will be joining me in the presentations. She's a supervising planner with Long Range Planning. And then from our environmental consultant team with AMAC, we have Rita Bright, Matt Buggert, and Taylor Lane. The purpose of this environmental hearing is to provide an overview of our draft EIR, to answer and clarify questions, and to receive public comment on the accuracy and adequacy of the draft PEIR. If you haven't already, please fill out a speaker slip located at the back of the room and bring it up. Our meeting format will really ask you to focus your comments and questions on the environmental impact analysis, mitigation measures that are presented in the document, as well as the alternatives analysis, and of course, the draft ordinance language. To be clear, tonight's meeting is not a decision-making hearing. This meeting is not about the merits or desirability of allowing cannabis in our state or in our county. The PEIR is still in draft form to solicit comments from the public agencies and you, the general public, as well. There will be plenty of additional time to comment on the proposed project, including the merits and desirability of it, at the decision-making hearings that will be coming up. We have the Montecito Planning Commission, the County Planning Commission, and the Board of Supervisors, as well as for the Coastal Zone, the Coastal Commission. We also have some updates on the progress of the Cannabis Land Use Ordinance coming to the Montecito Planning Commission on October 18th, and then another update to the County Planning Commission on October 25th. To give those of you new to the Cannabis Land Use Ordinance project some background, I'll start with what the state has done in regards to cannabis. In 1996, the Compassionate Care Act came to be, allowing medical marijuana usage in the state. In 2015, MRSA was put into place, and this clarified regulations for medical marijuana. As most of you know, in November of last year, the Adult Use of Marijuana Act was voted into law by citizens of California. And then in June of this year, the governor took those two portions of medical and adult use and combined them into one regulatory structure. Here in the county, medical cannabis cultivation has been banned since January of 2016. Recreational cannabis activities were also put on hold while we as staff went through the process that we're kind of halfway through right now to develop regulations for cannabis use across the county. In February of this year, the board appointed an ad hoc subcommittee, and they met regularly from March to September. We had 3 public meetings, and I see a lot of people here who've been to those meetings as well, and 2 scoping meetings on the environmental process. The ad hoc committee has also given 2 updates to the Board of Supervisors. And the ad hoc committee really focused on some main elements of allowing cannabis in some form in the county as far as land use permitting, business licenses, enforcement, health impacts, and taxation. And I'll hand it over to Mindy for the next slides.
Okay, thank you. I'll give an overview of the draft EIR, starting with The timing of it, we did a notice of preparation on July 12th, which started a 30-day comment period. We received over 100 letters with comments that helped inform the draft EIR. Then we released the EIR on October 2nd. We circulated it for public review. That started our 45-day comment period. So written comments are due to us by November 16th at 5 p.m. So don't forget that date. Make sure you get all your comments into us. How many of you have actually started, by show of hands, started reviewing the EIR? Oh, great. A lot of you have. Okay. Well, I'll give you the very quick rundown of it. This slide summarizes the environmental topics that we went into in detail. We tried to cover all the CEQA topics. The only one we didn't go into detail on is mineral resources, which we explain in Chapter 5. And so we developed a project description for the Cannabis Ordinance based generally on the state licensing program. The state proposes to issue licenses for activities such as cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, testing, and retail. And so those are the types of uses that we analyzed. We also looked at a range of development standards to apply, such as setbacks from schools, permanent fencing and security, as well as minimizing nuisances such as lighting, noise, and objectionable odors. The project description really focuses on commercial activities. We're really limited in how much we can regulate personal use. However, at the beginning of Chapter 3, we do explain that personal cultivation would be allowed without a permit and would be limited to indoors. This table, which you probably can't see very well from where you're sitting, is the zoning table from page 2-36 of the EIR in the project description. And this shows which activities could be permitted in each zone. And that's what we based our analysis on. Please keep in mind that the Board of Supervisors has discretion to do something different than what we analyzed in the proposed project. So when we looked at all the potential impacts, we found 4 categories in which the project would have significant and unavoidable impacts. In other words, even with mitigation, these impacts would likely remain adverse. The reason that agricultural resources is up there is because we found that a large number of applicants are likely going to want to build new greenhouses, and that we found there is a significant potential impact to prime soils with the building of additional greenhouses. There's a few impacts to air quality. One is that our current clean air plan does not anticipate this new industry and the traffic and the jobs and commutes that would likely come from this industry. So that's why we had a significant impact in that area. Under air quality is also where we analyzed potential odor impacts. And even though we will require each permittee to prepare an odor abatement plan, we still think there's a potential for sensitive receptors to notice the odor that comes from these cannabis activities. So we classified it as still potentially significant. The noise impact there is entirely from the expected traffic from this new industry, and while we are proposing traffic mitigation, we still found that additional traffic anticipated would be likely to remain significant. I won't go into detail on each of these, but these are the topics for which we found that significant impacts can be mitigated to less than significant levels with feasible mitigation. And these determinations, all the impact determinations, are summarized in the big table in the executive summary of the EIR. As I'm sure many of you know, under CEQA, we're required to analyze project alternatives. In particular, we have to analyze a no project alternative and then a range of alternatives that would lessen potentially significant impacts. And so that's what we did here. The no project alternative assumes that we would not adopt a permitting and licensing plan, but also it assumes that illegal cannabis activity could continue or expand. And then alternative one there is, it would exclude all cannabis activities in the Ag 1 zone, so that's reduced, it's basically a reduced project area by a significant amount. Under alternative number 2, all cannabis cultivation would be precluded from the Williamson Act provisions and it would be considered compatible use, but limited to only 22,000 square feet per Williamson Act contract. And that alternative was derived through our recent hearings with the Agricultural Preserve Advisory Committee, or APAC. And the third alternative, called the reduced registrants alternative, would impose a cap on the number of licenses and permits issued. It assumed that the cap would be about 50% of the number of licenses indicated in the cannabis registry that we compiled earlier this year. So we had an estimate of how many licenses would likely be issued based on that registry. And then we reduced that number and said, you know, what if we only issued so many? This is the most limiting alternative and the least impactive. And since CEQA requires us to identify which alternative is considered environmentally superior, we identified number 3 as that one. And then finally, we also noticed an error. We made a mistake that we didn't notice till after we sent the EIR out for public review last week. So originally in our first draft, the reduced registrants alternative that I just described, we had considered it, we had listed it as considered but discarded for reasons of infeasibility. But once we looked at it closer, we thought it might be potentially feasible and we analyzed it fully. But after publication, we realized that we forgot to revise or delete it under the considered but discarded. So we've issued an errata, 2-page errata that is now available on our website. And I have a few copies here too if anybody needs it. And so I'll hand the presentation now back over to Jessica and we'll get to public speakers.
So there are many ways to comment on our draft program EIR. So you can speak today. And we also ask that if you speak today, you also email your comments so we have them in writing to us. The email address is here on the screen, Cannabis Info, and it's also on the bookmarks at the back of the room, so you can just take a bookmark. You don't have to scribble this down. You can also do snail mail to me. We really prefer email, but we will take snail mail still. And then also, we suggest that everyone that hasn't done it already sign up for updates. That email or string is also on the bookmark, so then you'll know when we're going to the next decision-making hearings. And then our business cards are also on the back table if you want to talk directly with any of us. So to finalize out before we start public comment, I just want everyone to recognize that we're all here in this room because we care about the county and we care about what happens here. So it's very important to be respectful and considerate in your comments to others. Focus on comments pertaining to the environmental review and on productive feedback. No personal attacks, clapping, or cheering. That just wastes everyone's time. At our previous hearings, if you really want to agree with someone, you can wave your hand. Then they'll know you agree with them. Make your comments in the specific time limit. We're going to give everyone 3 minutes tonight. And you can check that by the little counter right by the microphone. And make sure to speak into the microphone because this is being recorded and will be rebroadcast on YouTube as well for anyone that couldn't make the meeting, that you might want to share that with them. So once again, this is not a forum to speak on the desirability of cannabis. Those forums are the decision-maker hearings, so the Planning Commission, the Montecito Planning Commission, and the Board of Supervisors. And we don't really have to line up because we only have about, what, 12? Less than that. Yeah, we don't have that many speaker slips. So thank you all for coming. And with that, Dan will call our first speaker.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So the first speaker is going to be Bruce Watkins.
Not quite the normal crowd to talk to, so first I just wanted to congratulate this preparation of an extremely good preliminary EIR. I want to thank the county and Emick Foster Wheeler for this level of professionalism into the process. My comments today mostly relate to just some factors rated as significant and unavoidable because I believe possibly some of these can be reclassified as less than significant with mitigation, using mitigation ideas I didn't see addressed in the EIR or the preliminary EIR. For example, where it's summarized on page 5 regarding the loss of soils due to paving related to greenhouses and support structures, potentially this could be mitigated by limiting such paving to a small percentage of total parcel area. A lot of the folks that are looking at applications own very large areas of land. I've got over 1,200 acres up on Tepesquay Canyon, for example. The state would only ever allow me to cultivate on 4 of that, which would be like 0.3% of our land area. On page 7 of the summary regarding the cumulative impacts for aesthetic and visual, as well as agricultural soil resources, some mitigators that I also didn't see mentioned might support a rating of less than significant with mitigation. Again, for aesthetic, existing county code for greenhouses already requires the use of visual barriers in the permitting process when you're submitting applications for those, cannabis or not. For large farms, cultivations can be entirely hidden inside the property, and that could mitigate the overall aesthetic impacts further. On the agricultural soil side, once again, limiting paving to a percentage of parcel size might be a mitigating strategy. Also, using organic farming methods, one could plant any other crop on the exact same size after a hypothetical cannabis cultivation with no harm to that secondary crop. So really no impact exists at all when one is using organic methods such as clean green and whatnot. So I just wanted to point those out. Thanks again. That was a really good report and look forward to seeing the final. Thank you.
Great. Next speaker is Paul Ekstrom.
Well, first off, I want to thank the committee for their work. This is quite a project for everybody to take in. I support the marijuana industry. I think it can really flourish in the Carpinteria Valley, but I'm a Carpinteria City resident. I live 50 feet from a greenhouse, and I really want to see the odor mitigation dealt with. It's a big deal, and thank you.
Sorry, folks, we're having technical difficulties. The timer just went out. So what I'll do is I will time as best I can with my watch. Next speaker is Cecilia Brown. And because you're not going to see a timer, I'll give you like a 30-second warning or whatever.
Thank you, staff and consultants. It's quite a labor of love to produce these documents, I know. I have a comment on content, and it would be helpful for readers of the document if these maps, figures 2-3 and 4, particularly for the South Coast, could be you could see them more clearly. It's kind of scrunched, and I'm somewhat concerned about the information that was used, and I'm wondering if there's going to be a listing of the schools, daycare centers, youth centers, so that the readers will have an understanding of just exactly if you got all of them. I provided some to Jessica in the past, but maybe if that could be in an appendix, that would be helpful. I'd like to speak about exterior lighting standards. Recently at the Planning Commission, there was a project where the new lighting standards that are in the California Building Code are being used, and the lighting standards you've got here are very they're sort of out of date, and what I'm very concerned about is, particularly with lighting in the rural areas, if they're going to be using LED lights, they should be more wildlife friendly. That should be the low Kelvin color number. And so I don't know how that's going to be brought into the lighting standards, but I think it's important that, in fact, that it is in some way. Also, there are 3 community plans which do have dark sky lighting standards, which weren't mentioned, and Gaviota, Eastern Goleta Valley, and San Ynez. And I think it'd be important to incorporate that, since the standards are somewhat more specific than what is in this document. Or I'm not sure. I didn't read the ordinances in the appendices, but I will go do that. What I wanted to also speak to another format issue on page 3.9-7. You have the various zoning districts for North County, but you don't have any for South County, and I was wondering if that's an oversight for South County zone districts. You have nice maps here. It'd be nice if you could also do it for South County. And also what I'd like to see is some consistency in language about the Goleta Valley. It's the Eastern Goleta Valley, not Goleta Valley, and on page 3.9-13, you missed it. So I'd like to, and I'll write these in my comments, but I'd like to see consistency throughout the document. It's just kind of what I do when I read these things. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Okay, next speaker is John DeFriel. And just once again, sorry about the timer going out on us, so I'll just give you a 30-second warning when you get close to the end.
All right, thanks, Dan. Hey there, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening, and thank you very much for the excellent work. It's taken me 2 days, and I still haven't gotten through all 608 pages, but I'm whittling away at it. A few quick comments. In consideration of a cap, if that were to be the case, I would definitely argue against it. In 2023, when the Type 5 licenses become available, unlimited canopy caps will be in place, and at which point that will be one license with no limitations. So thinking about this in terms of numbers of licenses is maybe not necessarily helpful. Another example is many people went onto the registry prior to the state releasing any draft regulations, and they have since reneged their draft regulations. We have no draft regulations, are waiting for them to come back. They keep changing the license types. If you were to cap it at the license numbers that people put in there, they would be inconsistent with how people will actually be applying for state licenses going forward, because all that licensure has changed since the registry was created, and like 2 times since till today. Additionally, if the Board of Supervisors has an incentive to increase the local economy here, and so that needs to be, the ordinance needs to support local competitiveness, and in this 2023 timeframe comes about, large farm operations will be able to come in and squash local competitors if they have been capped and not allowed to reach their maximum potential within the county. So in order to have a competitive advantage for local businesses, it's important that they are able to grow and expand over the next 5 years so that they are competitive 5 years further. In banning the Williamson Act as one of the alternatives, you basically remove over half of all of the ag land in the county that's eligible, and remove over half the people. Also in the EIR, it says in the top that actually cannabis cultivation is completely consistent with existing Williamson Act uses, so I don't see that alternative as having a strong backing. And additionally, it points out in there that even if all 2,000 acres of registrants were to attained licensure in 2,000 acres were in cultivation, that would still be less than 0.06% of all ag land in the county, and still be tenfold less than most other existing crops.
30-second warning.
Another little detail. It says that you can't use dust fences. Additionally, there's 20,000 acres of berries that all use dust fences around them. So we'd just like to see consistency for setbacks and fencing rules that are being applied to all other crops. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Zach Schaefer. All right, I guess Mr. Schaefer left. So next speaker would be Jesse Zaragoza.
Hi. Hello. Great job, very comprehensive. Quick background on myself. I came from Washington and I went through the medical to recreational transition. So I just kind of want to speak about a couple of things here I saw. In terms of security, for the most part, security is an issue if you are able to cover every square foot with security cameras, and also put the onus on the farms themselves to ensure, however they're going to protect their crops. Lighting, you can kind of mitigate. I had a greenhouse, it was 30,000 square feet. I guess I should speak about the greenhouse soils, as that seems like that's an issue as well. You can also, we actually didn't use no soil. We had a concrete slab and everything was on roller tables. And so that's another way to mitigate kind of the worries about soil for greenhouses. Transportation and traffic, it's kind of a trade-off there. The jobs, we were able to create 35 jobs in our city of Belfair. Transportation, really each farm or producer, processor, or manufacturer, et cetera, are only really looking at maybe one delivery vehicle per entity. In terms of lighting, there's a bunch of ways to mitigate that as well. You can put restrictions on maybe the vegetative cycle, which is the 18:6. You can require more dampering. For the flower, 12:12, that you can really set the hours to where there won't be any kind of lighting noise past 7 or 8. What else? There was one more. Odor. You can do a lot of things. While indoor, obviously, there can be 0 to no odor. In greenhouses, you can do a lot of, because it is almost a contained environment, and so you can do a lot of filtering. Outdoor, in general, might be the one where you might have to have certain setbacks, etc., for an outdoor cultivator. But yeah, that's about it.
Great, thank you. Next speaker is Steve Decker.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I have a clarifying question. Page 4-21, table 4-1, the breakdown of the difference between alternative 1 and the proposed project. It says that the potentially eligible sites, I assume in the Ag 1 zone, after regulatory constraints are considered, was dropped from 134 to 74. What constraints is that? I couldn't find it really clearly set out as to what it was.
It's the quantity of known cannabis sites that were located within Ag 1 lands. So there are currently 74 cannabis operations that are located.
Okay, so these are the currently operating, as opposed to people who had previously operated but are not currently operating based on their registration.
Yes. These known sites are a combination of those who have either grown in the past or are currently operating.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
All right. I'm in an Ag 1 zone. I formerly grew. I wasn't currently growing when I registered. So, but I'm still in the pool.
Yes.
Okay.
This is just to illustrate with known reliable data that we currently have at this point in time. It illustrates what happens to the eligible sites if that alternative is chosen and Ag 1 is precluded.
Okay, thank you.
Great, and if anybody else would like to speak, we're down to our last speaker slip, so please just submit a speaker slip and you're more than welcome to do so, but this is the last speaker. It's John Stashenko.
Hello, I have a little background on me. I've been in the medical cannabis industry in California for 14 years now, and we've been through a lot of different regulatory changes, and we've been able to make the adjustments necessary for all of these changes up to this point. However, we are seeing a stronger difficulty with complying with proposed state regulations right now, more so than we have seen in the past. My major concern at the moment, which I'd like to address, is I just got back from the licensing workshop, the state licensing workshop in Los Angeles, where I had the chance to sit and speak at length with the BCC. It is their feeling as of right now that without a state license on January 1st, all operations will be considered illegal operations. They did not say that they were going to have a grace period, which just 2 weeks ago, speaking to Lori Ajax, we had a grace period through the year of operations continuing compliantly until we're able to get a state license. That seems to be changing. We don't know until the regulations are finally out, but it is our concern that in order to get a temporary license from the state, we will have to prove compliancy with our county or our local municipality. And so I would just like to push for some alternative way of being able to show the state that we have been compliantly operating in Santa Barbara County pre-2016 and be able to apply for that temporary state license. Come the middle of December is when they'll be accepting the applications, and they're hoping to turn those applications around by January 1st. So I would just like to urge everybody to figure out a way that we could verify with the state so we can apply for licenses come the middle of December. Thank you.
Just to add to that, John's statement, we also have one more hearing that I didn't mention coming up on Tuesday at the Board of Supervisors. We will be reviewing an ordinance that looks at legal non-conforming status. And so if this is something that is interest to you, please attend and give public comment on that as well.
Just want to check, does anybody else like to speak or? Okay, well, thank you very much for showing up, but we do appreciate your participation. Once again, please do show up to the meetings that are shown on the board. If you have any questions, we're available. The contact information is on the handouts in the back. And thank you once again.